I don't know if you've ever had a neighbor who seems like they were put on this planet just to test the limits of your patience, but I do. Let's call him Dave. From the very first week I moved into my new apartment, I knew something was off. The building itself was pretty quiet, mostly young professionals, families, and a few older folks who kept to themselves. It was exactly the kind of environment I wanted: peaceful, normal, predictable. At least that's what I thought, until Dave made his presence known. The first night it happened, I was lying in bed around midnight, halfway drifting into that perfect state of sleep when suddenly the walls began to throb. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe a truck passing outside or construction somewhere down the street. But no, it wasn't temporary. The bass line grew louder and louder, pulsing through the walls like a heartbeat on steroids. The music wasn't just loud, it was deafening. It was the kind of volume you'd expect in a nightclub, not a residential building. I rolled over, shoved the pillow over my head, and told myself, maybe it's just a one-time thing. Everyone deserves to blow off steam now and then, right? But then the next night came, and the next, and the next. Every night, like clockwork, Dave turned his apartment into his own private concert hall. It didn't matter if it was a weekday or if it was 2 a.m. He seemed to live for blasting music when the rest of us were desperate to sleep. At first, I tried to be reasonable. I went over one evening, knocked on his door, and when he answered, I put on my politest smile. He looked about my age, maybe late 20s, wiry frame, messy brown hair that looked like he hadn't brushed it in weeks, and a smirk plastered on his face as if he already knew why I was there. "Hey man," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Listen, I live next door, and the music's been kind of loud at night. Any chance you could turn it down a little?" He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, like I was interrupting something important. Behind him, I could see his living room lit up with neon lights and a massive speaker system that looked way too big for the space. "Oh, come on," he laughed. "It's not that bad. It's shaking my walls," I replied, trying to stay patient. "I've been losing sleep. I'd really appreciate it if you could keep it down." For a moment, I thought he might agree. He tilted his head, pretending to think about it, then grinned. "Not my fault if you can't sleep, dude," he said, and with that, he shut the door in my face. That was my introduction to Dave's idea of neighborly charm. The weeks that followed were miserable. I invested in earplugs, white noise machines, even tried sleeping with headphones on, but nothing worked against the pounding bass and screaming lyrics that cut through the night. My mornings became a haze of exhaustion. I started showing up to work with bags under my eyes, irritable and sluggish. Even coffee stopped helping after a while. And every time I thought about confronting Dave again, I remembered that smug grin and those words. "Not my fault if you can't sleep." The man wasn't just inconsiderate, he was proud of it. One night, after lying awake for hours while his music thundered through the walls, I found myself staring at the ceiling, my hands clenched into fists. Something inside me snapped. Enough is enough. That was the night I started thinking about revenge. At first, it was just a fantasy. I'd imagine cutting the power to his apartment, or slipping ear-splitting alarm clocks into his mailbox, or calling the police every time he pressed play on his stereo. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't want something that would just inconvenience him. I wanted something clever, something that would get under his skin the way he'd been getting under mine. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One Friday afternoon, I overheard Dave bragging in the hallway to one of his buddies. He was leaning against the wall, his voice carrying down the corridor as usual, because Dave didn't know how to be quiet in any situation. "It's gonna be epic tonight," he said, laughing. "Big party. Got the playlist ready. Gonna be loud." The word loud made my ears perk up. I passed by, pretending not to pay attention, but inside my head, a plan started to form. If he was throwing a party, that meant more noise than usual. More bass, more yelling, more chaos. But it also meant he'd have an audience. And what better time to embarrass someone than when all their friends are watching? That night, as the sun went down, I prepared. I pulled out my portable speaker, the one I usually use for small get-togethers or listening to podcasts while cooking, and tested it with my phone. I didn't want music. No, that would be too kind. I wanted sounds that would drive anyone insane within seconds. I searched for the most obnoxious noises I could find. Police sirens, crying babies, air horns, screeching alarms. I made a playlist of chaos. Every sound I had hated hearing in my life, I crammed into one list and set it to repeat. By the time I finished setting it up, the party next door was already in full swing. I could hear the laughter, the stomping, the clinking of bottles, and of course, the music. It rattled through my walls like an earthquake. My heart was racing, partly from anticipation and partly from nerves. I wasn't usually the type to stir up drama, but Dave had pushed me past my breaking point. I waited, pacing my room, until I was sure the party was at its peak. The louder the music got, the more confident I felt. Finally, I grabbed my speaker, opened my window, and stepped outside into the cool night air. Dave's window was wide open too, neon lights spilling out like a warning sign. I set my speaker down right beneath it, connected my phone, and with one deep breath, I hit play. At first, it was just the wail of a police siren. It cut through the night like a knife, so sharp and sudden that I could hear people inside the party shouting in confusion. Then came the crying baby, shrill and pitiful, layered over the blaring air horn. The sounds clashed together in an unbearable symphony of noise. I couldn't help but smile as I stood there, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold inside Dave's apartment. And that was only the beginning. At first, I wasn't sure if Dave or his guests would even realize what was happening. After all, with his speakers blasting, maybe my little prank would just get swallowed up. But within seconds, I knew I had their attention. The police sirens howled, so realistic and piercing that half the people in the room rushed to the windows to check if cops had actually pulled up outside. I could hear voices shouting over the music. "Turn it down, dude. I think they're outside." And the shuffle of feet as people peered out into the night. Then the crying baby kicked in, so shrill and relentless that one girl actually covered her ears and groaned. "Oh my God, what is that?" The music inside faltered for the first time that night as someone turned the volume down. And that was when the air horn blared, long and sharp, bouncing off the walls and practically rattling the glass in Dave's windows. I couldn't stop grinning. My plan was working better than I could have imagined. From my spot outside, I leaned casually against the wall, arms folded, looking up at the window. Every now and then, someone's face appeared, confused, annoyed, trying to figure out where the racket was coming from. Then, finally, I saw Dave. He pushed through the crowd, clearly irritated, his messy hair sticking up worse than usual, his jaw tight with frustration. He scanned the courtyard below, his eyes landing right on me. And that's when I did it. I gave him the same smug grin he'd given me weeks earlier, the one that said, "Not my fault if you can't sleep, dude." Dave's face went red. He stormed out of his apartment, and moments later he was in the courtyard, stomping toward me like a bull charging at a matador. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted over the sirens and horns. I calmly tapped my phone, lowering the volume just enough so we could talk without shouting. Then I smiled. "Sorry, Dave. Can't sleep with all this noise. You know how it is." For a moment, he was too stunned to speak. His mouth opened, then closed again, his hands balling into fists at his sides. Behind him, a few of his guests had spilled out onto the balcony, watching the scene unfold. And that was the best part, his audience. One of his friends actually laughed, pointing down at us. "Dude, you've got competition. That's hilarious." Another chimed in, "Honestly, your neighbor's got a point, man. Your music's been crazy loud." The more they laughed, the more flustered Dave became. He spun around to shut them up, but the damage was already done. His big, confident host energy evaporated in front of everyone's eyes. "Look, man," Dave hissed, lowering his voice like he was trying to salvage some dignity. "You can't just blast noise like that outside my window. People came here to chill." "Oh, really?" I tilted my head. "That's funny, because people come here to sleep. You remember sleep, right? That thing you've been robbing me of every single night." His jaw clenched. "It's not the same." I shrugged. "Sure feels the same to me." Behind him, I heard another burst of laughter from his so-called friends. The girl who had groaned about the baby noise earlier yelled down, "Honestly, Dave, this is kind of karma. You've been blasting us for weeks." Dave spun around again, his face caught between embarrassment and fury. He tried to wave them back inside, but they weren't having it. The momentum had shifted. This wasn't just me against him anymore. It was me, his neighbors, and even his own guests. The sound still played softly in the background. Sirens wailing, babies crying, horns blaring. It was ridiculous, obnoxious, over the top. But that was exactly the point. Finally, with his pride crumbling and his guests laughing at him instead of with him, Dave threw his hands up. "Whatever. Party's over," he snapped. He stormed back into his apartment, cutting the music completely. One by one, his friends trickled out, some shaking their heads, others chuckling about how badly he'd been owned. I stood there the entire time, watching with quiet satisfaction, my phone still in hand, ready to unleash another round of chaos if he dared to start up again. But he didn't. By midnight, the building was silent. For the first time in weeks, I crawled into bed and closed my eyes without earplugs, without frustration, without dread. Just silence. Beautiful, blissful silence. The next morning, I half expected him to show up at my door, ready to escalate things, but he didn't. In fact, for the next several days, the nights were peaceful. Not a peep from Dave's apartment. It was almost too good to be true. And that's how my sleepless nights ended.